The valley of Dien Bien Phu lay cupped between the high green ridges of northwest Vietnam, a shallow bowl of pale dust and brittle grass. The morning light fell in thin bands, soft enough to blur the edges of the mountains. From a distance, the valley looked peaceful, a cradle of silence where even the wind seemed cautious. Soldiers said it listened more than it spoke. When it did speak, it did so in sighs. The dry scrape of bamboo, the faint shifting of soil, a lone bird crossing the sky too quickly. Some nights it echoed without reason, a hollow resonance that carried farther than the human voice. By early 1954, the French command believed the place would hold. They saw a fortress in its shape, a rim of hills to guard, a plain to defend. Yet beneath the confidence there was something older, something that resisted the language of maps. The ground itself appeared tired, its dust clinging to boots, rifles, and skin as if it wished to claim everything back. Each evening the air cooled, and a faint mist gathered over the river. A slow exhalation that blurred the line between water and sky. The men lit small fires and spoke quietly, their voices swallowed almost at once. Beyond the wire, the jungle remained indifferent. In that hush before history tightened its grip, the valley held its breath. Nothing moved, yet everything waited. The wind, the soil, even the silence itself. They worked as if the enemy had already died. Under a sun that burned without mercy, engineers traced lines in the dust and marked where trenches would cut across the plain. Paratroopers carried crates of sandbags and coils of wire, their movements slow, almost ritualistic. Local laborers hauled timber and earth until the sweat turned their skin the same color as the ground. No gunfire marked the days, only the rhythm of shovels biting into soil, the muted clang of metal striking rock, and the low murmur of orders passed down the line. Each sound fell into the valley's stillness and vanished. Letters written home spoke of monotony and heat, of days that blurred together. The men described the sky as too wide, too pale, and the silence as too complete. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move through the camp, as if it feared disturbing the balance. The valley had a strange patience. It watched them work, absorbing every sound until it became part of itself. Some soldiers joked that the earth was listening, that it would remember each footprint long after they were gone. At night, when lanterns burned low, the rumors returned. The Viet Minh were said to be close enough to hear the digging, close enough to feel the tremor of each strike. Every shovel strike sounded like someone knocking from below, one man wrote. Another swore he saw movement on the ridgeline, though no one else did. The officers dismissed it all as fatigue, yet something in the air had changed. The quiet no longer comforted them. It pressed down like a weight. In their effort to build defenses, they had unknowingly built an echo chamber for their own unease. The radios began to breathe at night. Beneath the steady hum of static, faint voices flickered in and out. Vietnamese words, too distant to catch, too rhythmic to ignore. Operators leaned close to the speakers, adjusting dials with quiet precision. Sometimes the signals faded into nothing. Other times they repeated, looping the same syllable until it no longer sounded human. A young operator kept a notebook beside him and wrote, "It feels like the air itself is carrying ghosts." He never explained what he meant, but the others understood. The same frequency returned at the same hour, even when the radio was off. Men swore they could hear whispers from unpowered headsets, faint and patient, like someone speaking from inside the wires. At first, they blamed interference, weather, mountains, foreign broadcasts. But the pattern never broke. Each night, around the same time, the voices slipped through the static, growing clear for a moment before dissolving again. Some found comfort in the repetition, as if the valley itself wanted company. Others stopped listening altogether, preferring the emptiness of silence to the sound of half-spoken words. The commanding officer ordered a full check of the equipment, yet nothing was wrong. Still, the transmissions came, soft, steady, unprovoked. One night, the operator removed his headset and realized the whisper continued, not through the radio but through the open air, following the pulse of the wind across the camp. The first shells came without warning, just a single tremor beneath the ground, a hollow pulse that rolled through the valley like a held breath breaking free. Then came the second and the third. Light tore across the ridges in pale arcs, bright enough to burn the color from the night. Men later called it a sunrise that screamed. Each flash lit the valley for a heartbeat, freezing every figure in place, every gesture half finished. The air itself seemed to recoil. Then, darkness returned, thick and immediate, as if it were trying to hide what it had just revealed. Every flash was a photograph no one would ever see. The light painted faces in silver, trenches in white, the dust hanging mid-air like suspended smoke. It was not yet chaos, more a strange rhythm, as though the mountain had begun to breathe differently. The French guns answered, their thunder rolling out in slow intervals. Between volleys came the high, distant whine of the Viet Minh artillery, unseen but precise. The valley that had listened for months now found its voice, and it was deafening. And yet there was beauty in it. The explosions bloomed like storms, each flare reflecting off the river, turning the water to liquid light. Men spoke quietly even as they fired, astonished by the surreal calm between bursts. The night no longer felt like night. It was a sky split open by mirrors. In that fractured brightness, war revealed itself not as rage, but as pattern, terrible, immense, and almost beautiful. When the barrage deepened, the sound seemed to come not from the sky, but from below. Each explosion pressed into the soil and lingered there, vibrating through boots, through bones, through the wooden frames of dugouts. The valley itself began to hum, a long, trembling note that outlasted the shell fire. Men stopped speaking when it happened. Some said they could feel the ground moan, as if the earth beneath them was waking from a long sleep. Others compared it to the resonance of a great bell struck from within. The valley had learned to scream back. It was not imagination. Decades later, geologists studying the terrain discovered that Dien Bien Phu's basin formed a perfect acoustic chamber. Its steep ridges trapped low frequencies, amplifying them until sound became something physical, something that touched, rather than merely heard. Records show that certain detonations registered miles away, long after the guns themselves had gone silent. The shape of the land had turned every blast into an echo of itself. At night, when the shelling paused, the vibration continued. Lantern flames quivered without wind. Mess tins rattled softly against each other. The men grew accustomed to the faint tremor, to the sense that the ground beneath their feet was breathing in unison with them. Some wrote of the comfort it brought, proof perhaps that the valley was alive, that it understood. Others felt only unease, wondering how much longer the earth could bear its own noise. Either way, no one doubted it anymore. The sound of battle had sunk too deep to be erased. In a dugout lined with damp wood and mud, a sergeant lit a single candle. The flame trembled, thin and nervous, trying to hold its shape against the weight of air that pulsed with distant thunder. He cupped his hands around it, not to save light. There was almost nothing to see, but to protect the idea of stillness. Around him, the men lay shoulder to shoulder, listening to the valley breathe. The sound outside came in waves, a shell far away, the faint whistle of falling debris, a pause that felt too long. Even the flame flinched at the sound. He wrote later that it was the strangest calm he had ever known. For a few minutes, the war felt distant, almost fictional. The candlelight softened everything. The rifles, the helmets, the faces smudged with soot. One man hummed under his breath. Some half-remembered lullaby from the north. Another joined, off-key but gentle. The sergeant thought of his daughter, her bedtime stories, the smell of soap and rain. The memory came unbidden, clean as a wound reopened. Outside, a shell landed close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. But no one moved. The flame bent, then straightened again. The men watched it recover, as if drawing strength from its refusal to die. For that small span of time, they were simply men in the dark, unremarkable, alive, waiting. The candle burned low, leaving a curl of smoke that rose like a thin prayer through the still air, dissolving into the breath of the valley. The first reports came from the sappers along the eastern trench line. At night, between bursts of shell fire, they swore they could hear something moving beneath them, a slow, irregular scraping, like hands against stone. The sound was faint at first, mistaken for shifting earth or distant tunneling. But soon it grew clearer, carrying through the wooden planks underfoot. One corporal described it as a heartbeat under the mud. Somewhere below, the ground was breathing. A patrol was sent to investigate, armed with lamps and picks. They followed the sound to a shallow depression where the soil had sunk in. The entrance they uncovered was narrow, supported by rotting beams blackened with age. The men descended one by one, their lights vanishing into the dark. Hours passed and no signal returned. When another team was sent after them at dawn, the tunnel was gone, collapsed, swallowed by the same earth that had opened it. Only one pick handle remained, splintered and buried halfway in the soil. Later accounts suggested the men had broken into an old pre-war mine, a remnant of the French colonial expeditions decades earlier. Some said it had been sealed after a gas pocket explosion. Others whispered it had been abandoned for reasons no one wrote down. In the days that followed, the same noises returned in different sectors, always after midnight, always below. No one volunteered to go down again. The valley's breath continued, steady, patient, and entirely its own. They found the letters weeks later, bundled in a tin box inside a half-collapsed shelter. The paper was stiff from damp and smoke, the ink bled into soft blue veins. Most were never finished, some never started beyond the salutation. Together, they formed a record of men trying to reach a world that could no longer hear them. One began plainly, "My dearest Elise, the nights are colder now." The handwriting was careful, the kind that measured thought before feeling. He described the rations, the smell of rain over the hills, the small comfort of cigarettes shared in silence. Then the tone shifted. "Sometimes I think the valley dreams while we sleep. We wake and it remembers us differently." After that, the sentences grew shorter, more uncertain. He wrote the word home, then nothing after. Another letter, unsigned, spoke to no one in particular. "If anyone finds this, remember that we built roads through silence." The phrasing was odd, poetic in a way that suggested exhaustion rather than intent. The last page carried only a drawing, a rough outline of a mountain, its base shaded dark, as if hollow. A few letters were addressed to parents, written with the formality of sons who had forgotten how to be young. They asked about harvests, about the family dog, about things that might still exist somewhere beyond the mountains, yet each ended the same way, not with farewell but with drift. Sentences cut short, words slanting down the page as though sleep had claimed them mid-thought. No one knew who gathered the letters or why they were never sent. The box was closed again and left where it was found, the paper softening further each season until the ink became dust, memory dissolving back into the valley's breath. The lieutenant was not a man given to fantasy. He spoke little, wrote often, and kept his reports in neat, deliberate lines. Yet one night, after weeks of sleeplessness and the unending hum of the valley, he began to hear something new. It came from the North Ridge, soft, rhythmic, too slow to be gunfire. At first, he thought it was the wind moving through cracks in the stone. But as the hours passed, the rhythm stayed constant, like a pulse measured through miles of earth. The mountain was not empty, it was listening. He described it carefully in his log. Low-frequency vibrations, repeating every 90 seconds. Possibly geological, possibly man-made. The phrasing was precise, clinical. Yet beneath it an unease slipped through. He wrote of feeling watched, not by men, but by the mountain itself, an immense, indifferent witness. His men laughed when he mentioned it, calling it fatigue. But soon, others began to notice the same faint tremor, always at night, always from the same direction. Months later, when French archives fell into Vietnamese hands, this report was found among the captured papers. The entry was intact, though the last page carried a single additional line in handwriting not his own. He heard what we were never meant to. No record names who wrote it. The lieutenant's fate remains uncertain. His name listed among the missing. His notes filed away under miscellaneous acoustic phenomena. To this day, the mountain still hums during storms, low and patient, as if remembering the sound of men who once mistook its breathing for their own. They said the stars went out first, not one by one, but all at once, as if the sky had exhaled and taken its light with it. The blackout began just after midnight. A distant shell hit the generator compound, and the valley folded into silence deeper than any before. For 7 hours, no light, no signal, no outline of horizon, only the intermittent flash of artillery somewhere far away, lighting the clouds like heat lightning from another world. Men described it later as the second night, the one that erased the first. Without light, even the familiar became strange. Trenches seemed to dissolve. Voices lost their source. A man could speak beside you and sound as though he were buried beneath your feet. The radios hissed and crackled. No transmission coming through. Only the dry static of 1,000 empty frequencies. Some kept tuning the dials anyway, searching for proof that time still moved forward. Others simply sat, hands over their ears, feeling the vibrations of the distant guns through the soil. In that darkness, perception bent. The air grew heavy, pressing close to the skin. The smell of smoke thickened, then vanished, leaving only the metallic tang of earth and sweat. One soldier swore he could hear the heartbeat of the valley again, slow and deliberate, like it was counting the hours they had lost. Another said he saw a faint red glow ripple through the clouds, a sky remembering how to burn. When dawn finally came, it did not feel like morning. The light returned grey, thin, reluctant. Nothing looked the same. The men rose from their shelters with the quiet of those waking from too deep a dream. Somewhere in the distance, a radio clicked once, then fell silent again. The blackout ended, but the silence didn't. When the power returned, the radios came alive again. Too alive. Operators reported faint transmissions on channels they had never used, voices threading through the static like whispers underwater. Some were French, some Vietnamese, some indecipherable. Most followed no structure at all, just breaths, clicks, the sound of boots on gravel. One operator noted the tape hissed, but no one had pressed record. When they played it back, there it was again. Footsteps, a cough, and a word half-formed, cut off by static. They checked the wires, swapped the reels, even moved to different posts. The voices followed. Each night, around the same hour, the same fragments returned, as if the air remembered what it had once carried. Some blamed atmospheric bounce from other units. Others claimed magnetic interference from the valley's soil. The sergeant in charge preferred no explanation at all. If it's ghosts, he said softly, then they're just doing their job. Decades later, when researchers digitized the old recordings, the same anomalies reappeared. Breath, footsteps, fragments of speech, layered beneath the original static. The frequencies matched no known pattern. One file ended with the faint rustle of paper, followed by a voice saying something that could have been attendes or help. No one could tell. The archivists logged the incident as signal residue. Yet every time the recording was played, new sounds emerged, as if the valley still wanted to be heard, still whispering through the wires that had once carried its last human voices. At dawn, the valley looked drowned. Smoke from the night's bombardment clung low to the ground, thick enough to blur the outlines of hills and men alike. Pilots circling above radioed that they could see no land at all. Only an ocean of grey, a shifting surface where mountains should have been. Below, the soldiers moved through it as if underwater, slow, silent, their shapes dissolving in the haze. No one saw the sunrise that morning, but it saw them. The light crept in without colour, pale and weightless, spreading across the mist until everything glowed in one endless shade. The world had lost its edges. A man could walk 10 steps and vanish into the fog, his voice muffled to a whisper. It was as though the night had learned to stay, finding a way to live inside the daylight. The air held the residue of spent shells and scorched bamboo, yet there was no sound, no birds, no movement. Even the insects had gone still. For hours, time refused to advance. The soldiers stood beside their guns and waited, unsure whether the battle had ended or merely paused. Somewhere beyond the haze, the river kept flowing, its course invisible but certain. When the first gust of wind finally stirred, the smoke parted just enough to reveal fragments of the valley, the riverbank, a broken trench, the curve of a helmet half buried in mud. Nothing more. Then the mist closed again, and the light settled back into its strange, steady silence, as if the sky itself were trying to remember how to fall. When the guns finally stopped, the sound did not end. It simply thinned, stretched, and folded into something else. The air trembled for a while longer, holding on to the last vibrations like a body unwilling to die. Then came stillness. Not peace, not yet. Just an absence so deep that even breathing felt intrusive. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence. It carried a texture now, a faint hum beneath the quiet, as though the valley itself remembered too much to truly rest. The surrender was brief, almost anticlimactic. Men emerged from their dugouts with blank faces, their movements automatic, like shadows detached from purpose. The flags changed, the orders stopped, but the earth made no distinction. Shell craters filled with rainwater, rifles rusted into the soil, and grass began its patient reclaiming. Within weeks, what had been fortresses turned into mounds, and the valley started to resemble itself again. Villagers who later returned spoke of strange nights. They said the wind that swept through Dien Bien Phu carried voices, soft, indistinct, neither French nor Vietnamese. Some claimed to hear laughter, others weeping, all fading before they could be certain. The elders called it the echo season, a time when the valley remembered what it had endured. Farmers avoided the place after dark, not out of fear, but respect. They believed the sound of the past needed space to fade properly. By the time the grass had fully grown, the battlefield had become something almost beautiful. Rusted metal gleamed faintly under rain, and flowers sprouted through bullet casings. From a distance, it looked peaceful, like nothing had ever happened at all. Only the wind kept the memory honest, whispering through the hollow barrels, carrying a tone that was neither grief nor relief, just remembrance. Decades later, the valley was quiet again, though never truly silent. In a small office in Hanoi, a historian named Lan sifted through the remains of a war she had never seen. Her task was simple: to digitize and catalogue a series of recovered field recordings from Dien Bien Phu. The reels were brittle with age, their labels faded by humidity and time. When she pressed play, the machine hesitated, the tape stuttering before the hiss settled into rhythm. Every tape began with the same breath, as if the past was waiting to speak. Most contained routine chatter, coordinates, weather reports, static punctuated by brief bursts of command. But on some, between the official transmissions, there were anomalies. Faint words spoken in French, fragments of songs, or something closer to sighs. Lan replayed them dozens of times, isolating frequencies, adjusting filters, yet the sounds refused to stay consistent. Each playback offered something new, as if the recordings were evolving, remembering themselves differently each time. She documented her findings carefully, writing in her log that the voices might be due to magnetic bleed or overlapping transmissions. Still, the explanation did not satisfy her. Late at night, when the building was empty, she would listen again with the lights off, letting the hiss fill the room. In those moments, she felt the space between the sounds, the pauses where something almost spoke but never did. One evening, she caught a phrase clearly for the first time. It was a single word: attendes, wait. The voice was distant but calm, as though unaware of the years that had passed. Lan stopped the tape and sat in the dark, the machine still spinning, the room filled with the quiet pulse of its rotation. The past, it seemed, had not ended. It was merely changing frequencies. The valley today is green again. Grass rolls over the ridges like slow water, softening every scar left by the years. Standing here, it's difficult to believe that once this same ground trembled under fire and smoke. The air is warm, filled with the scent of wet soil and bamboo. Crickets hum in low rhythm, and somewhere beyond the trees, a cow bellows, a simple sound, ordinary and eternal. Yet beneath it all, something lingers, a tone too deep to name. When the wind moves through the grass, it carries a resonance that feels older than weather. Perhaps the valley never stopped speaking. We just learned to listen differently. The river follows its same crooked path, glinting under the muted sun. Bits of rusted metal still surface after heavy rain. The hinge of a rifle, a crushed canteen, the lid of an ammunition box. They're not relics anymore, just pieces of the landscape, folded into the natural order of decay. Children from nearby villages play among them without concern, their laughter drifting over the field like echoes returned from another age. To them, this place is simply beautiful, a wide, open plain where wind and history meet without conflict. Distant thunder murmurs across the horizon, faint but steady. For a moment, it sounds like artillery again, low and patient, rolling through the folds of the earth. Then it fades, leaving only the quiet hiss of the grass in motion. The sound is not mournful. It's familiar, almost kind. You begin to understand that memory doesn't die. It merely changes pitch. What was once agony has become rhythm. What was once chaos has become breath. The light shifts toward evening. Birds cross the valley in slow arcs, their wings slicing through the last shimmer of daylight. A breeze moves through the reeds, and for an instant, the whole landscape exhales, as if releasing something it has held for too long. The past doesn't vanish here. It settles. It finds its shape in wind and echo, in silence and sound, shared by the living and the gone. And as you stand there listening, the valley seems to answer itself, an endless, gentle conversation between what was and what remains.